sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. So today's talk is self-effort and divine grace. There are many doctrines in Hinduism. It is the most ancient living faith in the world. According to the doctrine of action and its effect, there is a doctrine which is called Karma Yoga. Those who believe in that doctrine, they think people are responsible for whatever happens to them in the form of pleasure or pain. It is their action which produces such results. Then what is the function of God? God is, in Sanskrit, karma phala data. That means He is the giver of the credits or fruits of our action. He is like the cashier in a bank. The cashier cannot give any money to the depositor other than his invested capital and its interest. Therefore, God is like a cashier. So where then is the scope for God's grace in Hinduism? That question may arise. The answer is God's grace is not conditional. Any conditional gift cannot be called real grace. God showers His impartial grace on everyone, good or bad. Those who are good use God's grace for good purposes, and those who are wicked, they use God's grace for bad purposes. For example, a light cast by a lamp. A person is reading a holy book and another person is forging dollar bills with the help of the same light. One who is reading a holy book may end up being a saint, and the other will go to jail for forging dollar bills. Then what is the position of God's grace? Well, to explain that, he says, every person is like the owner of a sailboat. The wind is blowing, but in order to get the advantage of that wind, one has to unfurl the sail of one's boat. Then only he will get the benefit of that wind. Otherwise not. And if the boatman unfurls the sails of his boat, then the wind will start moving it. That wind is like God's grace. In other words, we should give up selfishness and completely surrender to the will of God. We have to become nobody. There is a saying, Nahang, nahang, tuhu, tuhu. Not I, but thou. And these are also explained with the help of some stories. There is a story of a weaver. In those days, a weaver used to weave cloth and sell that cloth in the market. So there was a weaver who was very honest. According to him, everything that happens according to the will of God. And he used to call God Rama, the will of Rama. And when the customers would come to his shop, he used to say, by the will of Rama, the price of the yarn was this much. By the will of Rama, the spinning that the yarn was this much. Everything happened according to the will of Rama. And people used to think that he was a very honest. So they used to come to his shop and buy things. One day the weaver was seated in the evening in the open porch of his house. And then he saw something. Robbers, they were going by the street. And they came to him and said, you have to accompany us. And they forced him to go. So according to him, by the will of Rama, that was happening. And he went with them. They entered a home and stole many things and put them into a large baggage. And he had to carry that baggage. Meanwhile, the police had been informed, and the police came. And the thieves and the robbers, they escaped, but he could not. Then the police got him red-handed and took him to the police station. After that, he was brought to a magistrate to decide whether he was a criminal or not. But to him, everything was happening according to the will of Rama. So, the magistrate asked him how he got all the stolen goods. Then he said that he was sitting there in the porch of his house, and by the will of Rama, these people came and forced him to carry that baggage. And then by the will of Rama, the police came and they escaped, but he could not. So he was arrested and brought before the magistrate eventually. Everything happened according to the will of Rama. And when the magistrate heard his case, then some people who knew this man came and they saw him and said, he can never steal. And the magistrate was pleased by their answer, and he was released. Then he said that by the will of Rama, the magistrate has released me. Everything according to him happened according to the will of Rama. So, it is an example how Nahong, tuhu, not I, but thou. That means one should give up selfishness and completely surrender to the will of God. Then we have to become nobodies. This is an example of how one can become nobody. Sri Ramakrishna could not use the word I. He would replace that word with this. He could not use the word I. In his case, everything was done by God. Nahong, tuhu. Not I, but thou, O God. You are doing everything. So this is how one can get the benefit of divine grace. Once every person is like a boatman and equipped with sails. So, to have the advantage of the wind, he has to put up the sail and unfurl the sail. And the sail will be driven. Sail will be driving that boat. And wherever the wind will drive, that's where the boat will go. In that case, that boat is like that weaver. To him, everything happened according to the will of God. Once a man came to Sri Ramakrishna and said to him, "Sir, what is the purpose of life?" Then Sri Ramakrishna said, "The purpose of life is to experience divinity." Then Sri Ramakrishna said, that is, this I should be given up and thou should replace that I. In his case, that had become a reality. He would not usually use the word I. He had to replace it with this. This means God. So everything is being done by God. So according to Sri Ramakrishna, every person is like the owner of a sailboat, as I have explained to you. And this selfishness has to be abandoned. Once selfishness is abandoned, then the boat will be driven according to the direction of the wind. That means surrendering to the divine grace. One who can do that, he can have the advantage of divine grace. Others who cannot do that, they suffer the result of their action, good or bad. So, divine grace and self-effort, these two are explained very nicely with this story. That's why Sri Ramakrishna could not use this word I. He would replace it with this. Because he had that experience. He set an example to us to behave in this world. And he had told that man who had come to him and said, "What is the purpose of life?" Then Sri Ramakrishna said, the purpose of life is to experience divinity. How to do it? Then Sri Ramakrishna said, by surrendering to the will of God. That means be a boatman and unfurl the sail of your boat. Then the wind will start driving the boat. That is God's grace. That's why in the prayer which I used to start this talk, I said, may all be happy. May all be free from disease. May all see only goodness everywhere. Let no one suffer from misery. Well, this is a condition which is achieved when a person has given up one's idea of doership and has surrendered to the will of God. That's why divine grace, which is impartial, which is the same to all, that divine grace, to experience that, one has to give up one's selfishness. Is it easy to do it? Of course it is not. One has to make a lot of effort to do it. Nahang, tu. Not I, but thou, O God. So self-effort and divine grace, they are interrelated, but they are not the same. Divine grace is like the wind which is always blowing. We have to put up the sail of our boat, and then the wind will start moving the boat. And then we should stop rowing the boat also. If we keep on rowing a boat, then we are not surrendering to the will of God, surrendering to divine grace. To get divine grace, we have to stop moving the boat, rowing the boat. That's why I said that with the light of a lamp, a person is reading a holy book and another person is forging dollar bills. Both will have two different results. One will become a saint and the other will go to jail. That is the result of one's action. So one should give up selfishness and completely surrender to the will of God. He has to give up selfishness and has to become nobody. That's why divine grace is impartial. It is blowing for all. One has to learn to use the divine grace by giving up one's ego, I. That is the whole purpose of spiritual life. That's why Sri Ramakrishna said to that person, the goal of human life is to experience divinity. How? By giving up selfishness and surrendering completely to God. This is what is called surrendering to God. That is unfurling the sail of the boat and stop rowing the boat. Then wherever the wind will drive the boat, that's where the boat will go. That is God's grace. These two are very important factors in human life: self-effort and divine grace. We have to give up our self-effort and we have to depend on God's grace as much as is possible or completely. This is the relationship between self-effort and divine grace. So God is the giver of the fruits of action only. As I have said, He is like the cashier in a bank. The cashier cannot give any money to the depositor other than his invested capital and his interest. So God's grace is not conditional. Any conditional gift cannot be called real grace. God showers His impartial grace on everyone, good or bad. Those who are good, they use God's grace for one purpose, and those who are bad, they use God's grace for bad purpose. And I have given examples to you also. So, to grow spiritually, one should give up self-effort and depend on God's grace. Na hong tuhu. Not I, but thou, O God. That condition will come. And that is God's grace. Thank you for patiently listening to my talk.